Thank you, Tom. It's a great honour to come and speak at an international Nuffield conference. Nuffield has been a part of my life since I was the age of 9, when my father Michael first went and did his Nuffield Scholarship. And there are 3 people in this room that I would like to acknowledge, because those 3 people have been really influential in the whole of my life and the direction that I have taken. At the age of 21, I moved to the UK to become a cheesemaker. And I was assisted in my attempts by 2 people, Jill Hutchinson-Smith and John Alvis, who have both been extraordinarily influential in my life. They've been fantastic role models, and John in particular, a wonderful mentor to me. And I want to say thank you to them for what they've done for me. The other person that I want to acknowledge is a Canadian scholar, Barry Cudmore. I inadvertently met Barry when he turned up to have lunch with my father one day, and Barry influenced not only the study topic that I chose to go and do for my Nuffield, but he has also influenced quite heavily what we have done at Tas Foods because of the way in which he developed the Prince Edward Island Food Trust. So what I really want to say in all of that is that I am one of many examples of the way in which Nuffield has influence that extends way far and beyond the study topic that people choose to do as a part of their Nuffield. I want to start my talk by talking a bit about some of the challenges we have in Australia. Our people in Australia are largely disconnected from agriculture. As you can see from the map, we live largely down the eastern seaboard of Australia, between Brisbane at the, halfway up the centre and Melbourne at the bottom. We look out to sea rather than back into the bush and the countryside. And we've earned our reputation as a beach culture because that is where we go on holidays, not out into the countryside. If you look at the vast pale pink area, which is almost white actually on this map, that area of Australia has a population density of 0 to 0.1 person per square kilometre. It occupies 80% of our land mass and is occupied by only 1 million people. If you look at the map of Britain by contrast, Britain is small and the people are connected to the countryside because they live in it and they holiday there. The darkest purple patches of the Australian map represent a population density of 100 people or more per square kilometre. The equivalent on the British map is only the 4th darkest of the 9 shades of brown. And the very darkest brown patches of Britain have a population density of more than 5,000 people per square kilometre. Providing national supply to the major retail chains in Australia is a very expensive and complicated exercise because we have to get product to distribution centres in every state. And this is a significant barrier for entry for many businesses. I run a business in Tasmania that's the island off the bottom of Australia, so we have the added complexity of having to get product across water before we start the journey. So I thought it would be really quite useful for me to demonstrate in European terms what those distances actually mean. Because for us to get product to Cairns in North Queensland, we would actually have to go 671 kilometres past Moscow if we were taking product from London. The distance to Perth is equivalent from going from London to the middle of Georgia. And to get to Darwin, I actually had to leave Europe because I was either going to somewhere in the middle of Mongolia where there were no towns, or I headed down into to Syria. The vast majority of Australian agricultural produce is exported and it's unprocessed or basically processed product. This is in part because we produce far more than we could possibly consume with our small population, but also because it's much easier for the farmers who are remote from markets and ports to load product onto trucks and farewell it at the gate. This map shows the location and agricultural products of the 8 Australians in my Global Focus program. Only one of them lives vaguely near any population density, and that's the vegetable grower in Queensland. So he supplies local a national supermarket chain. The 2 beef producers are both so remote that they're focused on producing export quality cattle that mostly go out live and are of a quality that no European would ever eat. Our wheat producer in Western Australia has 2,000 acre paddocks and buys Roundup by the semi-trailer load. So his grain is largely exported. The differentiators are the organic apple farmer in Western Australia, an oyster grower from Coffin Bay, and a grape grower from the Barossa Valley in South Australia, and myself. And we all use provenance features to sell products to parts of the Australian market. The position of control in the sale of food has evolved from the farmer to the consumer over the past few hundred years. This is because we've moved from the purchase of food being a matter of taking of what was available to being an experience, with many options to meet varying consumer needs. In an agrarian society, farmers sold product at the local market in season. When the product ran out, consumers had to choose something else, and if there was nothing else, they starved. The Industrial Revolution enabled mass preservation of food, which transferred control from farmers to processors. Over time, these goods became commoditised, so processors had to add something to the service to differentiate their products. And this has led to the advent of quality control, ensuring products meet specified standards, and in the case of food, that the food was safe to eat. Today, quality and food safety are not differentiators, they are the minimum expectation that we have for all food produced. And today, consumers expect the experience of a product to be what it claims to be. Products that fail to meet that authenticity and get exposed can crash catastrophically and very quickly. The Australian dairy industry is a really great demonstration of this evolutionary shift. Before 1900, our dairy industry was made up of individual farms selling their product, either fresh milk or cheeses, to local markets. World War I was the initiator of change. Britain was running short of food, so to help the mother country, Australian dairy farmers banded together and formed small cooperatives in local communities to build simple processing factories to make butter and cheese to send to England. Over time, as milk production on farms grew, the co-ops expanded and grew their factories to cope with the growing volume of milk supplied. At the end of 1973, Britain joined the European Economic Community, and the market for dairy products that had served Australia so well for 60 years closed overnight. New markets were found in Asia, but to secure them, the co-ops needed to find a competitive advantage. And very quickly, the Australian dairy industry became an international leader in food safety and quality assurance. By 2000, the market had shifted again, with a massive growth in the consumption of specialty cheeses as the Australian market weaned themselves off cheddar and processed cheese slices and began to embrace white mould and other European-style cheeses. Milk shifted from being just a commodity and a staple in the fridge to having provenance attached to it, such as being local, organic, lactose-free or high in protein. Milk powder moved very quickly from being just a commodity into a nutrition powder. And the rivers of white gold of infant formula began flowing from Australia direct to China. The best example I could give you of a new company that successfully entered the Australian and New Zealand dairy industry and took advantage of this shift was the A2 Milk Company, and it's grown in 16 years to have a revenue of $353 million. A2 was founded by scientists, not by farmers or by processors. It is driven by consumer support for its claims that A2 protein is healthier to consume than A1 protein. For farmers to participate in the A2 supply chain, they must first pay for the A2 patented genetic testing for each cow that's going to contribute to the milk supply, to ensure that all milk supplied authenticates the claim of exclusive A2 proteins in the milk. Farmers are then contracted for specified volumes of supply, and in return, they receive a small premium for their milk. The growth of the A2 Milk Company is supported by two key methods of authentication. The first is rigorous defence of their patents and brands, which authenticate the A2 Milk Company in their position of being the only trusted source of certified A2 protein milk. The second is the use of consumer endorsement, which builds trust in the market about the health claims of A2 milk, even though the scientific community does not actually endorse the claims of A2 milk on the whole. This endorsement has been particularly valuable for the growth of their infant formula in China, which moves through the grey channels to market, and these channels depend entirely on personal endorsements. Golden rice is a really good example of what happens when you provide a benefit to consumers or an intended user that they don't actually value. Golden rice is a genetically modified rice that was designed to solve the problem of malnutrition in the third of the world's population who are dependent on rice for their subsistence. It is enhanced with vitamins and minerals and gets its colour from beta-carotene. The poor people that this rice is intended to help are also largely uneducated. And a lack of education makes it really hard for them to understand the really complex information about why this rice is good for them. Instead, they rely on information that they do understand, and that is that for generations, their family has survived by eating a local variety of rice that is white. And by consuming white rice, they are demonstrating that they are not the poorest of the poor people, because the poorest of the poor people are forced to eat brown rice. In this instance, the colour of the rice was critical to gain acceptance with the intended consumer. The consumer rejected the product because it didn't meet their need to consume white rice. And scientists have failed to succeed in saving poor people from malnutrition as a result. GMOs in general have failed to gain widespread consumer acceptance because most GMOs released to the market benefit the farmer and or the seed company rather than the end user. Only when we start marketing GMOs that cure or prevent cancer and other diseases in humans will they start to gain widespread consumer acceptance. The CSIRO in Australia has developed a genetically modified product called Star Plus that has been proven to cure bowel cancer in mice. They're not looking to market it as a cure for cancer, but rather as a preventative treatment for people whose family have a history of bowel cancer, to consume and prevent them from developing the disease as well. Its slow progress to market has been delayed by a debate over whether it is actually a food or a pharmaceutical. The cost and complexity of releasing it is far greater as a pharmaceutical than as a food, but the GMO status as a pharmaceutical, ironically, is less of an issue than if it is a food. Now, Tina's already talked to us a little bit about Barley Max, and it was initially very, very successful in the Australian market, and then it failed. The health benefits of this product were readily accepted by consumers because it provided a regularity of bowel movement for people who had suffered digestive issues for years. And it had advocates that were absolute diehards who took it on holidays with them and wherever they went because of the change that it had made on their personal lives. Taking a new product to market is very risky. To invest in a successful product launch, a company requires two key things. The security of knowing that if the product is successful, there is an adequate supply of raw ingredient to feed the growth. And the second is the security of knowledge that a cheaper competitor will not emerge to outsell them. CSIRO's failure was in the way it separated the licensing of the crop growing from the processing. They had one farmer group licensed to grow it and 4 processors licensed to develop products with it. Without the confidence in a guaranteed supply chain or exclusivity for commercialised product, the processors were unable to justify the investment in the licence and they allowed it to lapse. CSIRO have now had to go out to market again and try and reissue the licence in a combined manner. The Green Revolution has seen a huge productivity gains in agriculture across the globe, and it's lifted the living standards of farmers in many parts of the world. Today, no one understands or studies agricultural productivity gains more closely and in more detail than supermarkets, who ensure wherever possible that the consumer is the beneficiary of such gains. Chicken is a really good example, and I'm talking about meat chickens. Through selective breeding, meat chickens have achieved a productivity gain of a reduction in growth time to achieve a saleable commercial chicken of 1 day every year for the past 30 years. So in 1976, it took 65 days to achieve a saleable chicken. Today, it takes 35 days. And the price per kilo received by the processors in Australia has reduced over that same period of time from $10 a kilo to less than $6. Our challenge in Australia is that farmers are addicted to investing industry and government research dollars into productivity gains that are not providing an increase in farm profitability. High-value products that meet emerging consumer expectations are not being valued by our farmers, who are too remote from markets to see the benefit. Only where farmers are actually partnering in the supply chain are we starting to see results. I run a business that bought a vertically integrated chicken meat business 12 months ago. In March this year, we released the first commercial scale, truly free-range chicken onto the Australian market, called Nichol's Ethical Free Range. Free-range chicken is a really growing market in Australia. It commands a 25% premium over barn-raised chicken. Consumers have a not unreasonable expectation that a free-range chicken will have spent some, if not all of its life, outside. There's no commercial scale processor in Australia that can meet that expectation, because the free-range meat chicken industry standards have been set and developed by the industry to meet industry needs, not consumer expectation. The standard allows for up to 50,000 birds per shed. Pop holes only need to be down one side of the shed, and the pop holes are open for 8 hours a day, the 8 hours that suit the farmer, not the chicken. And the area of range, bizarrely, need only be the area of the shed. So if you were going to put all your chickens outside and measure it in a per hectare stocking density, it's about 150,000 birds a hectare. This is not what consumers expect from free range and what they're paying for. We're confident that we're going to be able to disrupt the chicken meat market because the product that we make meets the consumer expectations for authentic free range. Our path to market began with consumer consultation to understand their expectations of free-range chicken. We also sought the views of animal rights organisations to understand their perspective and the resistance we might receive to our claims, and we then set about developing a response to those. Our standards can be trusted because they are independently audited by a third party and because we have an open door policy, meaning that we do live streaming of our chickens inside the shed, and we also have open days where we invite people to come and visit the farm. We're able to lead innovation in our industry because we're a vertically integrated business that can control the supply chain for the commercial scale development. Nichol's Poultry has been supplying chicken to the Australian market for 30 years, but Tas Foods is a new player in the industry. We don't have capital tied up in the existing free-range brands, nor are we locked into existing contracts for production of free-range chicken. We're therefore free to introduce a new premium segment to the Australian chicken meat category and to create disruption. A key focus of the conference is the role of farmers in the innovation and emerging food trends. Agriculture is a core component of food innovation, but it is not the driver, because in the 21st century, it is the consumer who holds the power. If you look at all the examples that I've given here today and talked about, and this one follows the path of A2 milk, food innovation begins with an idea for doing something that will be valued by the end user. Trialling and testing of ingredients and finished product need to be undertaken, as well as developing a deep understanding of how the end user will value the benefit being provided. Products that are truly innovative often require the innovator to be able to fund the full commercialisation before farm suppliers will commit to contract supply. The organisation who carries the commercialisation risk rightfully deserves the reward when the product succeeds. Nuffield was created to provide a vertically integrated, to provide a vehicle to advance agriculture and agricultural knowledge in Commonwealth countries. Today, Nuffield has a reputation for its alumni being leaders in industry and drivers of innovation and change. It's imperative that Nuffield, leaders of the 21st century, continue to evolve the Nuffield program to equip scholars to be effective leaders in the innovation food supply chain. This means we need to enhance our links to national and international food and agricultural research institutions. We also need to expose our scholars to successful innovation supply chains. It also means building understanding of the drivers of consumer sentiment. Today, activism is far more influential over consumer purchasing sentiment than what farmers are. We need to be exposing our scholars to activist groups whose sentiments are often far removed from those of the agricultural community. We need our scholars to understand what drives and motivates these people and how they mobilise consumers to enact change. There is a lot for our industry to learn from their methods and from their techniques. Nuffield is and will continue to be a broad church with room for all forms of agricultural business strategies. Let us ensure that we rightly position Nuffield to assist scholars of the future to develop the skill and understanding to be agricultural leaders of the food innovation supply chain, not merely successful farmers. Thank you.